Hello everybody, it's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by Fil Eisler. In today's episode we will focus on his musical beginnings, his collaboration with artists such as Robbie Williams, Kylie Minogue, and of course how he became a composer for film and television, as well as his latest project, his score for a new Netflix series called What If. Welcome, Phil.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good. How about you? Thank you for joining me.
Good, man. Good to be here.
Great to have you. Phil, please tell me more about how you started out in the film music business and what sparked your interest in pursuing a career as a composer.
Well, that's a story. I mean, I think it kind of, I'd been playing music since I was 8 years old. Well, younger really, but really sort of full on since I was about 8 or 10. And, I'd up until sort of my 30s, I'd had a career as a session musician, as you mentioned, with Robbie and a few other people. And I was playing sessions in LA, playing in bands and stuff. And, I think I've always been as fascinated with movies as I have been with music, really. So it just kind of started to take root here when I moved to LA. I guess it's sort of inevitable almost that you gravitate towards that if you love movies and you love music. And I think it sort of started, an opportunity came up, I was really trying to be in bands at that point, trying to, make records and making a lot of different records. And I got introduced to a music supervisor who had heard an album I'd made and, licensed something on a TV show or something. And she was working with Michael Mann at the time. And Michael Mann, was an idol of mine. I think he still to this day is one of my favorite ever movies. And I think he was making Miami Vice at the time, if I remember right. It goes back a few years. And I somehow decided, sort of somewhat on the spur of the moment, that I would start writing music and send it to her and see if Michael needed anything. Completely out of the blue. He'd never met. To this day, I've never met him, and it was, just, I think, as with a lot of things in my career, I think I've gone there through a sort of strange mix of enthusiasm and complete naivety. So just a total lack of understanding how the whole thing works. I mean, I'm sure if I'd have asked anybody in the business, whether that was worth doing, they would have laughed. And I should mention as well that the music supervisor I was talking about, this lady called Vicky Hyatt, who's still a very, very good friend of mine and great music editor and music supervisor. She asked me to score this short film about kite surfing. They were looking for somebody. They liked some of the music of mine they'd heard, and they'd no money, of course. And it was just, do you want to help out with this film? I thought, well, that might be worth it if I can, it'll give me something to score, and if I can start writing and send stuff to Michael Mann. So over the next year or so, while he was making the movie, I was still living part-time in New York and part-time here in LA. And I was sort of traveling backwards and forwards, and me and a friend of mine just wrote tons and tons of stuff. And, I would bug Vicky and say, hey, what does he need this week? And send him stuff. And of course, nothing ever ended up in the movie. I think might have come close at one point. I know it was tempting to a couple of scenes, but, nothing made it into the final film. But I ended up with quite a big library of tracks. And those then sort of gradually started appearing in a few TV shows and a movie and, things here and there. And that sort of eventually led to me scoring, a couple more short films and then a couple of little indie things. And then around, I want to say 11 or 12 years ago, I got into the Sundance Composers Lab. And that program is amazing. For those of you that don't know anything about it, it's basically a program where they take, I think it's 6 or 8 candidates every year. They choose out of, I think, several thousand, and bring them up to Sundance. Actually, now it's Skywalker Ranch in near San Francisco, for a sort of intense mentoring session. You get people like James Newton Howard go up there, and all sorts of people as mentors. And they really sort of put you through your paces, and it also, introduces you to the Sundance community. And so that was a big step up at that point, I think, was getting in there. And it was 11 or 12 years ago, and I'm actually going up this summer as an advisor, as a mentor. So it's kind of come full circle now.
Wow. So you keep pretty busy.
Yeah, there's always something, seemingly. I always think I'm going to get time off, and then it somehow disappears into a project. I'm still working on that.
That's great to have a career which is in full swing. So
no, it's brilliant, and I'm certainly not complaining. But there's a point where you just could use a week on a beach somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, in no way am I giving you a poor me speech over here. I'm super grateful to have a career like I've got.
Great. And Fil, you had already been writing for film, and then you were also involved with several Robbie Williams albums. Mm-hmm. And you had also co-written, if I'm not mistaken, one of his songs, which is called My Fuck You to You.
Yeah. Yes, a ballad. Yeah. Well, it is, funnily enough.
Excuse me?
It kind of is maybe not a ballad, but it's a slow song.
Yeah. How did you end up working for him back then? And could you give me some insight and details about your work relationship with this great singer?
Yeah, sure. How did it come about? I think I got a call from my manager at the time. I was only about 23 then, I think. And I had toured with an artist called Zoe, a British artist called Zoe, just went by the name of Zoe, and we toured around the States. Her MD was Guy Chambers, who, if you know any Robbie Williams history, is sort of his main songwriting partner, has been for years, wrote all the big hits with him, like Angels and Let Me Entertain You and all that stuff. And I think Guy had suggested me for the band. No, in fact, I bumped into, now I remember, I think I bumped into Guy somewhere in Soho, drunk, and we ended up having a few drinks and stuff. And he was just about to start working with Robbie then, I think. So I get this call off my manager saying, Guy's putting together a band for Robbie. Now, at that point, Robbie had just left Take That, and he was, the music establishment was not taking him seriously at all. And I knew nothing about him. All I knew was boy band. And I was a snotty little indie kid who was busy sort of doing my shoegazing bit, and not, I was like, I'm not joining that fucking boy band. Very, very snobbish about it. And they kind of talked me into it. I think in the sense of, in fact, I seem to remember my roommate at the time saying, "Hey, dickhead, go and take the gig, because you haven't paid your rent in 3 months. So either you take the gig or go somewhere else." So I went and sort of grudgingly went to the recording session. I met Rob, and we immediately got on, because if anybody who knows him, he's just he's a great bloke, and he's funny, and he's got a very similar sense of humor to me, quite dark, and so we just got on. And then I heard some of the songs that he and Guy had written, and they were fucking great. I mean, they were they'd written Angels at that point, I think, and a couple of others. And I just thought, wow, this is really cool. So luckily, I wasn't stuck up and snobbish enough to the point where I wouldn't do a gig if it was good music just because of who somebody, was. It was enough for me that the music was great, and I got on with everybody, and that was cool. So we did the demos, and nothing much happened for a little while, and then they called me back to do some. I think we recorded a single, and then that snowballed into his first album. And then the next thing, we were going on the road, and and at that point, nobody was really interested in listening yet. The album wasn't selling. Angels kind of came and went. It did okay, but nothing was sort of a smash hit. But they sort of committed, and I think Rob really committed to just going on the road and putting on a great show. And at that point, you have to think about it. Everyone in the band was like in their early 20s. Rob was in his early 20s. We just felt like a band. We didn't really feel like sidemen. We felt like a band, and Rob treated us that way, and it was like that on stage. And the live show sort of started to get a reputation, and we kept touring and kept touring and kept touring. And then eventually, I think like a year later, came Glastonbury. And, everybody says that was a turning point for him, but I really remember that gig. I remember standing backstage right before we went on. Now, for those of you who don't know about Glastonbury Festival, let's just say the audience is very particular. If they don't like you, you will be rained on by missiles from the crowd, and their specialty is bottles filled with piss, by the way. So,
no.
Yeah, so we were just getting ready for this onslaught because we thought they were going to hate us. And right before we went on, I remember the crowd was chanting something. I was standing backstage with Rob, and we couldn't quite hear what they were chanting. Was it Robbie, or are they shouting wanker, or what? We couldn't tell what it was. We were fucking terrified. I think Blur were headlining, or I can't remember. We weren't headlining. We were like one from the top, and we had no idea how many people would be out in the field. So the intro tape rolls. We walk out, and the field, like, you couldn't see the end of the audience. It was, I think, something like 100,000 people in that field. And the first song kicked off, and all I remember is the crowd bouncing up and down, but because the crowd was so big, and the sound delay as the sound traveled to the back of the crowd, everybody was jumping out of time. So it was like a wave of people just jumping up and down in front of us. It was crazy. And you can see in the video at one point, Rob and I sort of ran across paths, running across the stage from each other, and look at each other like, what the fuck is going on? And it was, from there, it was just kind of crazy being in the middle of this. He had such a meteoric rise then that next year. It was really insane to watch and to be in the middle of it. And fun, fun when you're 24 and out with a bunch of people you like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and like
totally.
working with, like records with, and great musicians as well. And it was really fun.
Wow.
It was just a really fun sort of 5 or 6 years.
Sounds good and also crazy. It must have been quite a lovely crowd back then.
Yeah, the crowds got bigger gradually. I mean, after that Glastonbury thing, I think we went on doing theatres for a while, but now people actually showed up, because before that they were not packed out. And then, that quickly went into arenas, that quickly turned into stadiums.
Wow.
And, we were touring stadiums all over the world. So it was crazy. It was fun. It's a fun time.
Wow. And if I remember correctly, you had also worked with Trevor Horn on Robbie's record Reality Killed the Video Star. That's correct?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, to this day, I've actually never met Trevor. It was sort of a remote thing. I had written a song with Rob called Super Blind.
Yeah.
Actually, it was a song I'd written a few years before that. It was the same with My Fuck You to You. The songs that I'd written maybe while I was in his band, but not with him. Those sort of things I'd done on the side. And Rob had always really liked those couple of songs and a couple of others. So at some point he wanted to do a version of it. So we sort of rewrote the lyrics a little bit to be, to make sense for him to sing it. It didn't make sense for him to sing all of my lyrics, I think. Plus, I'm really not the best lyricist of all time. Like whereas he's really great at that. You know what I mean? So we did most of it at his house, and I produced that side of it. And then Trevor, when he produced that record that it ended up being on, took my recordings and kind of took him to the next level. As only Trevor Horn knows how to do.
Yeah, great producer.
Yeah, I recorded orchestra on there and all kinds of stuff, and it was great.
Awesome. And you had also worked with other accomplished artists in the pop music world, Kylie Minogue being a prime example. And if you compare the pop and rock worlds versus the film music world, where are the major differences in terms of politics or recording equipment and also studio demands?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, Kylie was actually with Robbie. He did a song with her called, oh God, what was it called? I think it was called Kids. And I played on it, and we did some shows where she came and sang with us. And then we did a record with Tom Jones. That was amazing. So all of these crazy artists that I got to work with, some of them through Robbie, some of them otherwise did work with Dave Stewart and Holly Johnson from Frankie Goes to Hollywood, like all of, some really interesting people. But the mainstay of my work was with Rob, really. Like, these were things that occasionally came up. It wasn't really like I was a session player around London. I kind of never really did that. And same, I did that a bit in LA before the film writing took off, really at that point to pay the rent. Again, like, all with great musicians, but that was not really something I ever aimed to do. I never particularly wanted to be a session player. And I think I only got hired by very specific people because I always kind of just did things my own way. I was never that guy that could sit down and read a chart and play, whatever style you want. It was always kind of going to sound like me. I mean, how do they differ? I don't know. I would say the rock world, if nothing else, was great prep for being a film composer. Insofar as you asked about politics, it's politics, and it's also just sort of being around other artists and knowing how to act and how to sort of know when to make your voice heard and know when to stay out of the way and not get in the way. And there's a lot of that in film. A lot of film writing is not getting in the fucking way. That's the and that applies both musically and like you said, politics and everything. There are times that you just take a step back and this thing is working fine without you. You have to sort of take the ego out of it. But then conversely, when you're really needed, like, you have to step up and not be shy. So it was good prep in that way. And as I'm sure you can imagine, when you're 24 and touring with a big artist, things are a little bit crazy, and you meet all sorts of lunatics.
I bet.
And that, as it turns out, is really good practice for scoring films. Because
meeting lunatics,
there's a few lunatics in Hollywood as well. I don't know if you've ever heard about that, but
yeah.
But I kind of, in a strange. I mean, I told you I had a dark sense of humor. I think in a strange kind of way, I sort of relish that, and although, I mean, there's a range of, quote unquote lunatics in Hollywood, ranging from just the funny, eccentric to to like your dark Harvey Weinstein. Okay, this guy needs to fucking go away.
Yes, sure. Yeah.
But on the sort of lighter end of things, there are a few like real eccentrics that I kind of, really love and cherish working with, because they're. I wouldn't want that to go away. You know what I mean? You don't want. I don't think anyone got in the business of making movies or music because they wanted a normal life. Like, I was a complete outsider. I was a weird kid. I was a loner. I was a nerd. I was all of those things. And like, music's a perfect home for someone like me. It's not a perfect home for someone who wants, straight, sort of above board 9-to-5 work. It's just not how it works, man, and it's certainly not how it works in the movie business either. I think people make the mistake of assuming that it's quite, because it is quite a corporate thing on some levels, that's how it operates, because people who work for movie studios, people who work for record companies are sort of beholden to a very corporate structure, but we're not. I mean, I wouldn't even know how to do that. I'd go bananas.
Yeah, you got a good point there. Very good point, actually. And then you started writing for documentaries, also such as Into the Air, a kiteboarding experience, and then you started
Hmm.
working on short films and TV series, and eventually, of course, films. And when you became more and more experienced, when looking back, are there any particular mistakes you had made back then? Is there anything you wish you had avoided in terms of writing or communication with directors, producers?
Um, I don't. Well, certainly not regrets. I think every, not to sound like a self-help book here, but every mistake makes you stronger. And if you, you know, if you don't learn, it's sort of, it's like a boxer. If you don't learn from getting knocked out, then you're going to keep getting knocked out. And I think it's similar in most things, really. I think if you learn from your mistakes and you know how to get on and build on that, you'll
Sure.
be all the better for it. So there's nothing I really could say that I regret. Did I make mistakes? Oh my goodness. um, yeah, some. Because I don't know what the hell I was doing. I think most people don't know what the hell they're doing when they get into this, because there are college courses for film scoring. I certainly don't want to put down my friends who teach those courses or have attended them, but I think any composer will tell you that that it does not prepare you for the world of film scoring in the slightest. I think there are very practical things you can learn on courses like that, and I think they're great. And there are very different circumstances. For instance, the Sundance Labs is a great, fabulous program, right? Because it's very real world based. It's like I said, now it's up at Skywalker, which is a great post facility. And much more like the kind of place you're likely to be working if you actually end up doing movies for a living. I've had people come and work for me here at my studio, whether it was, assistants, tech people, orchestrators, whatever, who were kind of new to the business, straight out college. And, I think their experience ranged from, or their reactions ranged from, yes, this is absolutely what I want to do with my life, to, oh my God, no way would I want to do this for a living now that I can see what it's actually like. Because it's incredibly hard work, man. It's put it this way, I would never, ever complain about being on the road again like I was when I was in my 20s and 30s. Because this is so much harder. When you're on the road, pretty much it's laid out for you. Get up at this time, be in the lobby at this time, get on the bus, get on the plane, get off the plane, get to the venue. Everything is mapped out for you. If you're a composer, the thing they don't tell you is you essentially become a sort of business, and the business is you. So not only do you have to write music, but you have to fulfill a lot of other roles, and I remember I had an assistant who quit after 6 months of being here, and I asked him why he was quitting, and he said, I can see what your life's like, and I don't want that for my life. I couldn't argue with that, man. I just say fair enough. The guy was in his 20s, and I said, I'd much rather you figure this out when you're 26 than when you're 46. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
Unless you love this, don't go down this road. If you wake up every morning and just like live and breathe music and movies, and that's all you want to do, and it's all you think about, and it's, it takes up every brain cell in your head, then maybe you should do this for a living. If that first fact isn't there, then just turn around and do something else. I don't mean discourage people, but I think I'd be doing you a favor, because it's just, it's just too hard otherwise. I think it's better to find out when you're young than later on.
Okay, Phil, let's dive right into what if.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. It's a new Netflix production, which you scored as well. A thriller series, so to speak, which is also filled with quite interesting and also ruthless people. Lunatics, as a matter of fact, which we also talked about earlier.
Mike Kelly loves lunatics.
Yeah.
That's why I love him.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he's a lunatic or anything.
No.
But he does love writing lunatic characters.
And given the nature of this series, Phil, and the events it depicts, would you describe this as a cautionary tale to some extent?
You'd really have to ask Mike what his sort of motivation for writing it was. I mean, you could certainly see it that way. I think it's more fun than that. I mean, it obviously doesn't take itself too seriously, even though it plays it straight. It's fun. But we're never really sort of playing anything with a nod and a wink. Like, it's all played very straight. Everybody knows what the series is and what it's about. But we play, same as, when I was working on Revenge with Mike, it's, I basically scored it almost like a film noir. That was the idea. And I know Mike was sort of very enamored with a lot of 90s movies when he was coming to making this. And so, whilst we didn't listen to any of the scores, because some of the scores, let's just say some of the scores hold up and some of them don't. But I think it was more the attitude of those movies that, there was fun in them, but they took themselves sort of quite seriously. So, and that in itself was quite fun. So I mean, I guess so. It's an interesting show.
Absolutely. And there is one particular quote which I remember and which I also wrote down. True success comes at any cost. Nothing worthwhile is ever achieved without sacrifice.
First of all, I love that you're quoting Anne Montgomery. Mike, I'm going to text Mike right after this. He's going to fucking love that. It's funny how Mike ends up writing these sort of iconic female characters who are always like, the bad guy, so to speak. It was the same with Madeleine Stowe in Revenge. He's very good at that. I suppose she's right in a way. Pretty sure I haven't murdered anybody along the way, but or done some of the other things that they did in the show. But girl's got a point. What can I tell you?
Yeah, I think one might say it applies to certain aspects in life and also about certain professions, depending on, which field you're working in. But I think she has a point. But of course, she was a little off her moral compass, if I might say so.
Tiny bit, yeah.
A tiny bit, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if at any cost. That said, I don't think I've ever doused myself in kerosene and set fire to a building.
Yeah, I mean, she is actually, she has a quote unquote good side to her, but she is very much a sociopath. I mean, I think that pretty much, she's...
well put.
Yeah, and of course a very successful businesswoman, but of course also totally nuts, as is Mr. Not the doctor, Ian.
Well, he's just an outright psycho.
Yeah.
But I think the most fun part of the show is scoring her, and she is the show, which is, it was interesting because when we first got together, Mike and I said, okay, we don't want this to be anything like Revenge, no orchestra. It should be like very stark and, very kind of modern and all of that stuff. And then I started writing and that stuff just didn't work at all. And so, I started writing a few orchestral things. I had a few themes that sort of applied to Anne. and it just started to evolve into this very sort of noir-y thing. I mean, what was interesting, what did get left behind from that first draft, if you like, was, you know, I'd been playing a lot with my modular system, with modular synths, and so this very sort of industrial, dark undertow beneath the whole thing. And when I started writing in a sort of orchestral style that you don't usually hear with that kind of programming, it just clicked. It was a cool combination of stuff. So that side of it was fun because, you know, she could take all the melody and all of the big sweeping themes and stuff that you can throw at her, and it works.
So basically, as I would also like to put it, the show is about this, to a large extent, the means justify the ends kind of
right
attitude. How did you try to capture this musically? I mean, there are many great synthesizer sounds in this show. How did you figure out which note, which theme, or which sound would embody the characters in the show and the story the most, or the best, or most appropriately?
Right. Thematically speaking, there was sort of two ends of the show to come from. There was Anne's end, which was the sort of what I was just talking about, this almost like industrial, very dark, very big orchestral sound. Well, I say big. It's more that it kind of creeps in on you. It has this sort of very, very film noir kind of, you know, dark kind of vibe to it. And then there's the couple, the unsuspecting couple who were young and in love and everything seemingly all right. So that's kind of where we had to start with that. And that was a very different musical approach. You know, it had to be, how's it Philip Noyce put it? In fact, I ended up calling their love theme was called In the Bubble, because that's how he described it. Philip Noyce, who directed the first two episodes.
Yeah.
That's how he kind of described it. It was like, they're in a bubble and nothing can touch them, and it's great until Anne comes along. And then sort of as the episodes went on, their themes started to merge a little bit, both in terms of the instrumentation and in terms of the tonality of it. So by the time you get to the last episode, the love themes suddenly sort of turn slightly sour and broken, and it's, you know, it's, the notes have changed slightly. The instrumentation's still similar, but it's a much more sort of mournful version of it. And as far as, you know, picking sounds and synth sounds and things, I don't know. I'm just the way I work. Sort of, I'm a big fan of analog and I guess live, you know, human sound sources. What I mean by that is things played on actual instruments, even if it ends up being mangled through synthesizers. I sort of like it to start somewhere real. I'm doing a movie at the moment where I'm, for the first time really since I had, you know, a studio as a kid, I mean, like 20 years ago, you know, I'm using tape, and old tape, like, you know, 1/4-inch tape machines from the 70s and 80s and 90s, you know, 4-track cassette machines making tape loops. Are there easier ways of doing that in a computer? Sure, but it's not the same. And part of it is the journey you take to get there, because it dictates a slightly different creative path. You know, it's the same with modular synths. There's a random element to that you're not going to get by just sitting down and thinking about it. Sometimes you just have to play and see what comes out, and you're going to come up with happy accidents that way, and that's everything. And it's the same with tape and old bits of analog gear, and, you know, I mean, literally, I'm sitting in a room surrounded by reel-to-reel machines and dictaphones and God knows what. And it's not exactly nostalgia that it invokes for me, but it's sort of like a memory almost. So a lot of the synth sounds that you hear in What If might have originated there and then been put through the modular system or sampled or, you know, manipulated in the computer, but they always start somewhere real.
Phil, have there been any talks about season 2? I mean, as the ending may point to another season or to another storyline?
You know, you probably know as much as I do, mate. To be honest, we've talked about it. I know Mike has, I know Mike has some great ideas for season 2. Whether it's happening or not, I don't really know. I've kind of been in a bubble of my own, actually. Because once I get into a film or whatever I'm working on or a TV show, I kind of drop off the face of the earth. So I don't really know, but certainly the ideas that I've heard Mike talk about were a lot of fun.
Great. I mean, I like this first season a lot. I mean, I think I finished all episodes within 2 days.
Oh,
yeah,
that was a couple of long nights. Jesus.
Yeah, it was very intriguing, very good storytelling. I mean, there are certainly, I know there are quite a few people out there that were not too fond of it, but personally, my 2 cents, it's a very, very good series. I found it very intriguing, very good characters, very good storytelling, very good score, and I totally loved it, and I would love to see another season of this.
I'm glad you loved it, man. I think it was. Listen, it was certainly fun to work on. Oh man, I forgot I was going to tell you this. I remembered an anecdote when you were asking me, about sacrifice and what you have to do in the music business and the film business, and to sort of get to that. But I just finished doing a movie with Melissa McCarthy and her and Ben Falcone, who's her husband, who directed the movie, and I was mixing the movie over at John Powell's studio on the West Side. Had never met John at that point, but I was working with Sean Murphy, his mixer, and we were doing the movie over there. And I was on another project that was, as I was finishing this one, the new one was starting. And there was some crisis where we had to do a pickup session, and the producers had decided they wanted to change something at the last minute. The show was dubbing in, I think, 2 days. So it looked as though I was going to have to drive from John's studio in the Palisades back to my studio, which is on the Warner's lot in Burbank, which is completely the other side of Los Angeles, and stay up all night, write all night, rewrite the entire episode because everything had been recut and all of this stuff. And I was sitting in John's sort of little reception area on the phone with my whole team, which is, like 20, 30 people, from everyone who works at my studio to the orchestrators, the contractor, the engineer. Everybody it was just like delegating, right? You're going to do this. You're going to do this. We're going to get this ready. We've got 24 hours. Everybody go. And as that was going on, John Powell walks in, and he kind of stood there for a second, and then I hung up, and Sean introduced us, and I said, hi, nice to meet you. And he said, everything all right? And I said, yeah, just it's fine. But there's a bit of a fire I had to put out because an episode got recut, 2 days before it's supposed to print master and all the rest of it.
Oh God!
And he said, yeah, I often feel like 90% of my, he said, about 10% of my time is spent writing music, and the other 90% I'm mostly just calming people down.
Really?
And apart from thinking, thank fuck it's not just me. I just thought, God, it's really true. You have to wear a lot of different hats as a film composer, and part of it is when things start to get crazy, as they inevitably do, you're somehow the one who's got to keep everybody calm, and just go, no, don't worry, you're gonna be fine, and this is gonna be fine. Because if you think about it, the composer is really the last creative stop on a movie. They're the last person that contributes original material to a movie, and that is a pretty scary prospect for if you're a director and you've been, planning and making a movie for, especially somebody's first film, people put their entire lives, sometimes their savings into that stuff. And by the time they get to score, if you think of what they've been through, like, you've got to be prepared to be a little bit of a therapist as well, in order not just to keep them calm, but just to understand where they want to go with the film and to unravel all of that. So, yeah. Anyway, it was an interesting moment. But there's a lot of, if you've got your eyes open, there's a lot of sort of learning moments like that in a career in film and music.
I bet. I mean, it sounds crazy, but it's. I totally get your point. I mean, that probably happens all the time. And as Sean Powell said, I mean, it's especially towards the end of post-production, it's pretty stressful. Yeah. Fil, is there actually going to be an album of your score?
For What If?
Yes, for What If.
I'm not sure. We're talking to Netflix about it at the moment. For some reason, Netflix don't seem that keen on putting out soundtracks at the moment.
I've heard that a couple of times now. Yes, multiple times.
Yeah, not sure why that is, but I'm sure they'll come around, because there's a lot of really great music out there, and I'm sure they want to support the art that they're making. Yeah. Plus, the obvious benefits it's got for whatever movie or show you're working on. So I hope so, because there's some music that I'm very proud of on there. But I'm afraid I don't really have an answer on that at the moment.
And I hope they will release it eventually. I mean, at least a digital download. I mean, for Christ's sakes. I mean, is it too much to ask?
I hope so. You put so much work into these things, that it's always nice when, you're able to present it like that. And I get asked a lot. But not just that project, but about, other things. And there are some that, that sort of automatically seem to have soundtracks put out, and then, others where it's a little bit more tricky. But, hopefully it'll be out there at some point.
Great. Fil, last question, if we still have time. What's actually next for you?
Right now, I'm working on a movie, which I'm not allowed to say much about, but is really fantastic and I love. Hence the piles of tape in my studio that I was telling you about. So I'm really enjoying being in the middle of that. And then I do a show called Empire on Fox, which is coming back in the fall. And just signed onto a new show on NBC, I believe, which is going to be happening a little later in the year. Couple of other movie projects coming up. Yeah, there's no. The one thing I'm really excited about is I wrote a violin concerto that premiered a couple of months ago now, and then another concert piece, and those seem to have sort of taken on a life of their own. The looks like the concerto is going to be performed in a few other places around the world, and and hopefully a recording at some point. So that's another thing that I'd like to put some more energy into when I've the time. I mean, that the concerto came along at a perfect time, because last summer I had a little break, and so I sort of started then, and something I was able to do at a decent pace, and not have to kill myself doing it. That's something I was very proud of. So that's hopefully I'll get a bit more time to do that at some point too.
Great, sounds good. Fil, thank you very much for taking so much time out of your schedule to chat with me today.
No, thank you.
I love talking to you today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
Yeah, it was great fun.
And I hope we get to talk again in the future, and I hope you have a nice day.
Likewise. Same to you, man. All right, have a good day, man.
Take care. Bye-bye.